Welcome to the Manufacturing Masters Podcast with your host, Allison DeFord.
This episode is going to help you drive explosive growth, and all with no smoke and mirrors. We are so fortunate to have Mark Roberts with us today. He is the CEO and founder of OTB Solutions, and I call him the sales problem fixer. Mark is also an author, and we're going to jump into his new book, Driving Explosive Growth, a no smoke and mirrors approach to profitably growing your business. You are going to learn some really mic drop moment things that are actually fundamental that you probably aren't doing right now. And that's one thing I love about Mark is he is very no nonsense, but he makes so much sense with the method that he shares, the coaching that he does, the observations. He likens it to doing an MRI on your business. And rather than an invasive surgery, what you probably need is just a tune-up. And we are going to get into customer surveys, voice of customer surveys, that is, and how to do them properly. We also get into qualifying your ideal customer, figuring out whether or not your website is your best salesperson, and wait till the end because Mark is going to share with you how to become one of the 14% of companies who are crushing it during times of uncertainty versus the other 86% who batten down the hatches and cut expenses and held their breath. This is a fantastic episode for every manufacturer. I am so glad you're here, and thank you for investing some time in yourself and your business today. Everybody, here we grow. Well, I don't know about you, but I think there's going to be smoke after, rising from this episode, and it's the good kind, not the bad kind. Mark, you are the no smoke and mirrors guy to me, and I am just so excited to have you.
Well, thanks for having me. Yeah, it's been, my ministry almost. My website is No Smoke and Mirrors. It's time to stop lying and over-promising and making stuff up. About a third of my revenue is voice of customer research, and I have an unfair advantage. I hear from your customers, and what they're saying is, I don't want a rep pitch slapping me, right? Hopefully I didn't offend anybody, but showing up, throwing up, assuming I have all these problems. I just want somebody to be authentically human, get to know me, know my business, and help me. If you do that, we're going to do a lot of business, but I can't tell you how many salespeople are behaving badly out there right now. And I know. Now, I'll ask the salespeople at my clients, or I'll look at their CRM, and it's like, yeah, they stopped buying because they're going in a different direction. Well, I interview them, and they're like, no, I quit buying because the salesperson did a terrible job on the last price increase, and I went to their competitor. It's really eye-opening for CEOs when we do research. But yeah, I love No Smoke and Mirrors. It's really getting some traction. And then that turned into my first book, my big book. Yeah.
Right. Well, and I always feel like I dub people with, like, I don't know, a fun name or whatever, but you're definitely like the sales problem fixer.
Well, that's funny you should say that. Back in 2000, when I started getting into my own business, I was working with a fellow who's really famous now named David Meerman Scott.
Mm-hmm.
He wrote The New Rules of Marketing and PR, but back then he was an instructor. And he said, Mark, what do you want to be known for? And I started listing all stuff, and he kept saying gobbledygook, gobbledygook. Everybody's saying that. And then all of a sudden I said, fix sales problems. And he's like, that's it. Own it. So today, if you Google fix sales problems, I'm the #1 website in the world.
Fantastic. So you're the fixer, but the good kind.
I think so. I mean, nobody
No
wants to.
Michael Cohen in the room.
No. Nobody wants to feel like they need fixed.
Right.
I prefer to look at it like a tune-up. You know, if you've been riding your
love that.
car pretty hard for 100,000 miles, shame on you. It's time to pull off and get an oil change and maybe do a little tune-up, right?
Yeah.
And if your business, particularly a manufacturing business, has been in business for 10, 20, 30 years, you're doing a lot of things smart. Most businesses fail in the first 2 years. So all I want to do is let's figure out what needs to be done and fix it. I call it running an MRI on your business.
Oh, that's perfect. Well, it's like a health checkup.
Yeah.
You do it for yourself, for your physical person. It's really smart to also do it for your business.
Well, it's like I was reminded I'm not 27 anymore. I was at the gym. I hurt my right shoulder. I was convinced I knew what was wrong. I'm convinced that I tore something. I went to a doctor. They, did an MRI. They did an X-ray, and they're like, "Great news, dude. You just have some inflammation." Now, if that doctor would have said, "Okay, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to sedate you. I'm going to cut you open and figure this out," I would have ran.
Right.
But unfortunately, that's what a lot of these consultants or so-called gurus on the internet, they just jump right in. I'm big into diagnostics. I was really blessed to have some great doctors and, with a little bit of rehab, I actually wrote an article about it, how sales training is like rehab. With a little bit of rehab, and by the way, it was no exercise I'd ever seen before. My shoulder got strong again. So that's the process. It's nothing fancy. I tell people no smoke and mirrors isn't fancy. It just works.
That's fantastic. Well, and it does. I know it does. And I've known you for a long time now, and you've been on the old podcast, and I love hearing your success stories. And I'm excited for our listeners to get a hold of your new book because it's called Driving Explosive Growth. And you lay out the framework to help them do this. And it's by applying this no smoke and mirrors approach. And then one thing leads to another, and you wrote another book, but we'll talk about that in a minute. Why this book? Why should somebody pick this up, and what are they going to get out of it?
Well, I'm a coach. I help CEOs, but I've also had my own coach for 30 years. And she's been on me for 10 years to write a book. And I'm like, I can't. I've helped so many different manufacturing companies, plastics, metals, aggregate, CNC machines, compressed air. And she says, I'll bet you if you sat down, the process you used to help them was always the same. So what I tell people is I discovered a process. Mm-hmm. And it starts with that MRI. Don't assume anything. Don't assume the leaders of the company have all the answers.
Right.
They're there. They have a lot of great input, but I start with customers. We do a customer assessment. We call it a voice of customer research. We call a, statistically relevant number of your customers. But the fun one is we also call people who haven't ordered in 6 months or later. And we also call people, everybody you quoted but did not win. Now that's where the truth comes out, right? They don't have any relationship with you.
Right.
So we gather all that data. What's your satisfaction score? What's your net promoter score? And then we usually find like 2 or 3 what we call actionable insights. Oh, really? You're finding it difficult with our pricing, or, oh, really? Our website isn't, intuitive, or again, we're always inward facing. We think what we're doing is smart, but there's a real power in making it easier for the customer.
It's so true. And do you find that the majority of folks you work with, manufacturers specifically, are they shocked by a lot of the insight that you uncover, or is it like a mix of, yeah, I kind of thought so, but now it's confirmed? Like, is it?
Yeah. What you said second is what I hear most. It's like, when I drive home at night, my gut said that was true, but I didn't want to think about it. but now you just brought it to the headlight, right? Like I just did a voice of customer research for a pretty large manufacturer. And interesting, we do it by tiers. So tell me who your A customers, B customers, and C customers are.
Sure.
Not only are we going to look at whether they're a current customer or old customer, but how much business do they do, right? And the CEO literally dropped his head when we went over the results, and he's like, so you're telling me my C and D customers are thrilled and my A customers aren't happy? I'm like, yeah, that just paid for the research, didn't it? And he goes, absolutely. And the funny thing is, my gut told me that was true. Now, the one that really rocked one of my CEO's worlds, though, was when we also look for, is any of your large customers getting ready to leave? We call them detractors. And I was working with a pretty large company, and their manufacturer, and their third largest customer, when we interviewed him, he was so angry. He says, I've already sourced them. We're talking like 30% of their revenue. I've already sourced them. I've already found another supplier. I appreciate you calling. Nobody asked. Nobody even noticed that my sales are half of what they used to be because I've been integrating this new supplier. Well, as soon as we hear that, our rule on our team is contact the CEO in 24 hours. Now, to the credit of this CEO, he got on an airplane like within 24 hours and met with this guy. And they worked through, basically it was one of their salespeople behaving badly. They had to do a price increase during COVID, like a lot of people. Mm-hmm. But instead of talking about it, he just sent an email and said, take it or leave it. Well, they were going to leave it. But to the credit of this CEO, he got on a plane with the VP of sales. They had a great meeting. I guess it was like a 6-hour meeting. And not only did they turn it around, that customer is now their top customer in revenue.
Oh, I love that. I love hearing that.
Because once they're gone, it's going to be really expensive to get them back.
Yeah. Yeah. And not easy to replace.
How do you replace 30% of your revenue? I don't care how good my training is, right? I'd love to tell you I could do that. And I actually helped somebody do 30%, but it took 18 months.
Yeah.
When the military contract ended for one of my other manufacturers. But yeah, it all starts with research. So we research your customers. Then I look at your salespeople. The vast majority of manufacturing salespeople have never been trained. They've been trained in what you make and how to work your systems and how to enter an order and, by gosh, your credit policy, but they don't know how to sell. And I assess them really quick. I can give you an answer in a week. And it's like, typically they're really good at presentations. Often they're really good at relationships. But the data that just keeps coming in, like we score on a scale of 0 to 100. And I just helped a manufacturer on closing skills. Their people scored 12.
Oh, 12.
And when I was the CEO of a company, if I found out I spent X amount on my website, X amount on an airplane ride, you took somebody out for a steak and you didn't even ask for the order, that's when my head would explode, right? Well, there's 2 reasons people aren't successful with closing, is what our research even shows. The first is a mindset thing. They're worried about being a pushy salesperson. They're so worried about the relationship, they don't ask for the order. And the second is they've never been taught how. A professional close, or as the book Baseline Selling refers to it as, an inoffensive close. So I teach them. My favorite one's a calendar close. Hey, right now I've got an 11-week lead time for that huge machine. You said you need it by October 15th. Is there any way you give me an order by Friday so I don't let you down? That's a calendar close. But what these guys are doing is just quoting like a quoting machine, assuming that means it's a close. No, it's just a quote.
Right.
But yeah, we find closing is a challenge. We find the upfront questions. Ever since the pandemic, people stopped asking good questions and building rapport. It's like they're on a face-to-face Zoom meeting now, right? They're not like getting to know people, caring about people. In my book, I have an entire chapter on human-to-human selling. It's a shame I have to teach it, but it's one of my most popular classes.
Ooh, well, I'm a fan of that.
Yeah, you are.
It's so important and it's so fundamental. So, I mean, we could go into why do you think, things change, whatever. I think what's more important today is what can manufacturers do moving forward, right? Like,
Correct.
I feel like that's the real, that's what we've got to focus on. So I know you talk a lot about understanding your ideal customer, and that's the reason for voice of customer surveys. For a manufacturer who's listening to this right now or watching, and they think they're scratching their head, they're like, I've heard about these, I've thought about it, or maybe we did a survey years ago, but my gut's telling me we need to do a voice of customer survey. I have no idea, how long does it take? And like what price range are we talking about? That these are the questions I get asked a lot.
Right.
Can we give people like a range of this is how long it can take, this is the range where it could cost, so that they can determine the value. Like this is an investment, it's not just an expense.
Well, as you can imagine, it's a function of the number of calls. We don't just send out a survey. One of our clients, very, very large client that manufactures um, um, construction equipment, you would know the brand, but I'm not allowed to say because of the NDA, had us call 419 of their customers. So that was very expensive. But we're not doing like, survey slapping either. That's also a
Right.
term where people just send these surveys out and they get like a 1% return rate. And there's nothing you can do with that. It's like,
Yep.
okay, 1% of my customers said this. No, we actually call and we have 15-minute interviews with everybody. And it's a good question. It takes us about 4 to 5 weeks now to interview, a statistically significant number. I can tell you, I mean, I just sold another one last week. Pretty large company, manufacturer, about 150 million, but they want to grow. They want to be 300 million in the next 5 years. So we're interviewing about 100 of their people, and I think it's about, I'd have to look what we build, but it's like between 7 and 8 grand.
That is so worth it.
Well, yeah, because I mean, I'm going to be totally transparent. Where I make my money is in the strategy work. So
Mhm.
I'm having these surveys done, but I need the data. I'm
Right.
not going to make something up. I'm not going to listen to, let's say, your quality manager who's been there 30 years that says, we need to do this. Well, maybe you do. Or maybe what he's advising is great for him, but not great for the company.
Right.
So first, we talk to your customers. That takes about 4 to 5 weeks. If it's a huge number, like I said, the 419, that took 7 weeks. And then we give you what we call an executive brief. Not only do we give you the data, like the review of, your net promoter score was 67, your customer satisfaction score was 85, your A customers are 87% happy, but your Ds are, 64. I mean, we have a lot of data. But then we also give you an Excel spreadsheet of every conversation and every question. And then I teach your salespeople how to use that. So if you want to grow your current accounts,
That's great.
you have an unfair advantage now. But what I don't want your salesperson ever doing is, hey man, I've called on you 15 years. How could you have said this? Well,
Right.
what you just did was, now the person feels it was a trick. You didn't really care. It was some kind of a sales manipulation. And I'll tell you what, I'm never doing it again.
Yeah.
So you have to teach the salespeople how to use the data, how to turn the data into questions, but you can use it to grow. And
That
it's
is so exciting.
so powerful. So we've assessed your customers. We've assessed your salespeople. We look at your transaction data. What does the data tell us, right? Sometimes we do what we call a digital footprint audit. Your website should be your best salesperson in terms of lead gen. A lot of them are just virtual brochures, which right?
Yeah.
They're beautiful, but are they working? Are they doing what they're supposed to do? Or are they just the virtual, brochure? So that one typically takes about 10 days. and we scrub your footprint. We tell you how you're ranking. We actually look at your top 3 competitors, what keywords and phrases are bringing people to them, what words are bringing people to you. So again, gathering all this data, doing that MRI on the body of your business, right? And then often we assess the leadership team. There's been some great work out there on trust. Trust is the foundation of growth. Yeah. And if you don't have trust in your leadership team, I don't care how good all the other things are. So we assess the leadership, we look at the trust level, and if it needs to be improved, we start working on that. So we've got all this data. We sit down with the CEO usually first, and we say, here's what we've learned. What do you agree with? What do you disagree with? What makes you uncomfortable and what validates? And like you said, about 80% is validation. And at some point they say, okay, Doc, what should we do? I said, that's where we meet with your team. We create a strategic plan. And we create a 1-page plan, not, like something that's in a 4-inch thick, vinyl binder that only gets dusted off every 3 years, right? It's the living document that we do. And when people leave that meeting, it's usually 2 days. Everybody knows what they're supposed to do for the next quarter, for the next 2 quarters, right? But we do it based on data. Long story is we've got the MRI.
Yep.
Now we need to do the rehab.
That makes so much sense. Like you said, it's not invasive. It doesn't, and it's actually going to be more cost effective, right? Think about the difference between an MRI and some PT versus
open heart surgery.
Exactly. So
because what a lot of consultants want to do is open heart surgery because it's a lot of money.
Right.
I want to make a difference, right? This is like my ministry. I want people to be raving fans. Over 80% of my revenue now is referrals.
Beautiful.
It's just a joy to watch companies grow. One of the happiest times in my life was when I was one of the leaders of a manufacturing company, plastics company, to be specific. 3 of my current accounts are plastic accounts. $4 million in revenue. We took them to $300 million in 13 years. That's what I know how to do. I just filmed a short video on mindset. A lot of the CEOs I talk to at manufacturing, we could never grow 20%, 30% year over year. Well, if you believe that, you won't.
Exactly. Self-fulfilling prophecy, right?
But, there's that book by, I believe, Collins that talks about the BHAG. Let's say you're at 50 million now, family-run business, your grandfather started the business, but you want to take it to 150 million. Great. Because if you only want to grow 10%, usually when I meet with an executive team, they give me like 30 things they want to do. And they're not doing any of them. But when you want to go from 150 to 200 million, then we need to do these 4 things. It's magical when we have that meeting. It just cuts through the clutter. It's really what starts the momentum, and it's a lot of fun.
Well, I think what's exciting, and hopefully also for you listening or watching this, is that I am glad you brought up mindset, because explosive growth, number 1, it's achievable. Number 2, like you said, it doesn't normally take a list of 32 things you've got to do. Right? It's like, call it the top 5.
Right.
It's getting down to brass tacks and thinning out all the, it's like, no, just do these things. Focus on this. And again, I'm glad you brought up mindset, because I just did an interview with Lalit Gunaratne. I always say his name wrong. I'm so sorry. And he coaches businesses, and he's an engineer by trade, which is, I love that, and also a manufacturing owner. And he coaches leaders on mindfulness, and also meditation is one of his techniques or tools. But I think mindfulness or mindset, do you find that it's I don't want to say it's everything, but if the leader or leadership has a particular mindset, like we just said, that's going to become a self-fulfilling prophecy. So do you see that happen like on a regular basis? Is that their mindset is this, and this is exactly what they're doing. They're getting the results for this, for what they have in place.
I'm sure I didn't make it up. I probably read it somewhere, but it's called Shadow of a Leader. If one of your leaders believes something, I promise you their entire team does. And sometimes I actually do research of engagement where we interview your team. And often, if you're a CEO and you have a successful business, you don't like alternative thought, but you're open to it. But what we often find is leaders, they've been doing it 30 years. They don't want to rock the boat. One of the things we're finding with a lot of manufacturers now is, they might have a leader that's just wanting to glide into retirement in the next 3 years. They're going to, we've heard of, quiet quitting,
Yep.
What a lot of companies are doing with those folks is what we call quiet firing. They don't talk to them anymore. They don't give them any goals. They just leave them alone. It's like, look, they were loyal for 30 some years. No. What I recommend is, what are they really good at? They don't have to have a leadership position, but how will they add the most value in the next 3 years in an area where they're gifted? And then we put people in different roles. One of the exercises we do at an offsite meeting is called functional accountability. Tell me what each role needs to do, then we'll put the names in it. And we often find that, oops, we have somebody that needs to be able to do this. The title's marketing, but the person doing it's never been trained.
Right. I see that every day.
And you'll love this story, right? So I did a digital footprint audit. I should have asked more questions. I came in, their weakest link was their website.
Okay.
Unbeknownst to me, the CEO's daughter did it. She's in college and she was trying to save money, and it was visually beautiful, but it wasn't working. But I could see how uncomfortable he became. And actually the rest of the team all knew the website wasn't working, but it took a third party, like a prophet from another land, so to speak, to come in and go, hey, this is broke, right? But yeah, sometimes I have to tell bad news. I wrote a blog about it once, here's a banana for your baby, right? And it is a picture of a monkey in a stroller. I have to tell you the good things, and I also have to tell you the parts that are needing some work, because we need to fix them to really scale.
Yeah. Well, I've done exercises like that in mastermind groups that I've been a part of for the last decade. And it isn't necessarily easy to hear the hard stuff, or let's call it the truth.
Right.
But once you do, and depending on, again, mindset, are you open to receiving that information? To me, that's number one. You have to be open to hearing it and then sit with it. Like, really think about it. Don't, instead of getting defensive or feeling dumb or fill in the blank, just really look at it. Almost like an out of body, at least that was my experience. And also with clients, like when they actually will just sit with it and realize that that's the only, okay, it's like, okay, here's what's actually happening. Ouch, that hurt to look at the truth. But how do we, what are we going to do moving forward? I'm like not finding the words here. How can we change it?
Right.
Right.
And I promise you, in your team, if you all got together, I used to write it on the bottom of my email, none of us are as smart as all of us. If we got together in a room undisturbed, we'd figure it out.
Yes.
But I often, and the mic drop moment in one of my trainings recently was, I'll never forget the look on the CEO's face. I had his entire leadership team there, and I says, do you want to feed your ego or do you want to feed your family?
Woohoo! How'd that go over?
Well, you should have seen the looks. Everybody's rolling their eyes like, brother, I can't believe he said that. But What it was is it's kind of like my grandfather didn't do it that way. Well, there wasn't cell phones when your grandfather ran the business.
Yeah.
This particular person has a lot of success with the Amish and Mennonite community.
Mm-hmm.
He said, oh, we don't need a website. We don't need any SEO. Those folks aren't even allowed to use it. Well, actually, the research shows they all have cell phones and they use them during the day and they don't use them after dinner time. So if you don't make it easy to be found for that community, that niche, and speak the way they want you to speak, shame on you. So we learned the data, we gave them the data, and they made the adjustments that they need to make. And I have no doubt they're going to be seeing 20, 30% growth year over year for the next few years.
Well, all this is so exciting. I love giving manufacturers the tools and the resources and the inspiration to grow sustainably, to maybe get out of their own way, because we all get in our own way. I can speak from experience. And really to, like, I think we hear so many negatives every day, and, you know, it's easy to get sucked in to, oh, everything's going to hell in a handbasket. And I think what's exciting and more meaningful to your business and to yourself is to focus on the positives. You know, you can consume that information. It's good to be knowledgeable and know what's going on. But do you have any advice for manufacturers who, you know, maybe they are getting caught up in the doom and gloom,
Right.
and like, what do you say to them?
Well, again, I'm a big fan of Voice of Customer. So I wrote the first book, Driving Explosive Growth, basically to get my coach off my back, right?
Mm-hmm.
And also for people that maybe they're too far away. Ironically, the book is selling the most in Japan right now. I don't know why. But I made it so everybody could follow the framework if they want. If they want my help, by means, call me. But then very quickly, people are saying, tell me more about this Voice of Customer stuff. So I wrote a second book, Voice of Customer. And on the covers, an iceberg. And on the tip of the iceberg is what everybody knows, right? Mm-hmm. But it's what under the surface that makes the difference and grows your company. So when people have that, oh my gosh, the interest rates, the cost of capital, I've heard it all, right? I usually ask them, well, why do people buy from you? I mean, you're not out of business. I think it's because, why don't we figure that out? And why don't we plant a flag and shout from the mountaintop, if you want this, we're here for you. Mm-hmm. And they're like, wow, I think my sales team is doing that. Well, actually, I already talked to your customers, and your salespeople is basically plugging and chugging. They're doing a lot of quotes. They're doing the best they can. They've never been trained, but they're not doing that. Does your website say what you do best? Why do people buy from you? Why do people buy from your competitors? These are all questions we need to scale your business. And if you didn't ask, you're going to make it up. You're going to assume, mm-hmm. Well, granddad told me, right? Or my dad told me, or yeah, I talked to our largest customer and they said, well, you know what? Your large customers are different than your B's and your C's and your D's.
Yeah.
We got to know what everybody needs and wants. And I promise you, if you're the one that delivers what they need and want, it's not about the economy. It's not about the presidential race. I heard somebody say that this week. Oh, my business is down because of the presidential race.
Oh, my God.
Oh, wow. I mean, does that make you feel better when you go home at night? It doesn't help me any.
Yeah.
No, it's not. And what we want to do is get to the root. Mm-hmm. Voice of Customer Research is actually part of Lean Six Sigma, right? Yeah. So I'm just introducing it to the sales and the strategy world. There's an author named Vern Harnish. He wrote the book Scaling Up, and I actually went through all their training. I have all the tools. But he says, creating strategy without customer insight is criminal. So you go off the mountain high with all your managers, the offsite, right? Woo! Did you talk to one customer before you went? If not, you're making stuff up. And then the CEO is upset, right? 6 months into the year, we're missing plan. How could we be off this far? Boy, I thought we had a really good plan. Well, you didn't have the data.
Yeah, well, it's like like in the marketing world for me, it's like, are you creating in a vacuum, or are you bringing in ideas and working together? I feel like that is strategizing and selling in a vacuum,
Right.
because it's just all in here. And that is a beautiful observation, because how many companies, or I should say, how many people listening to this right now are nodding their head like, yep, that's what we do every year.
Well, I got to share one. My favorite job ever was helping a company that made vehicles so people in wheelchairs could drive again. I mean, it was one of those jobs where, shame on me, but I was working probably 15 hours a day just because I loved it. So I joined this company. Private equity brought me in because they weren't hitting their numbers. I asked them about their, why do people buy from you? And I got all these like highly technical answers, right? Best in class, blah, 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 all that gobbledygook. So I went on the road and I started asking people who bought their vans why they bought it. There's other options out there. Number one answer was it was quiet. I'm like, what?
I love it.
What do you mean quiet? Oh, well, if you've probably never been in a vehicle where most vehicles have a ramp that folds up in the door and it rattles when we drive, and it's hard to have a conversation, let alone listen to the radio. But your ramp goes into the floor. I feel like I'm in just anybody's vehicle right now. I can play the radio. So what did we do, right? Good marketing people. We set up Take a Quiet Ride campaign, and we did it in like every state, and we had all our dealers, and oh my gosh, that company went from 14 million. Within 6 years, they hit 90 million. Now, was that the only thing we did? No. I'll never forget the other one. Akron, Ohio, on Howe Road. I was talking to a veteran. Unfortunately, he had lost both his legs in the lobby. And he says, you folks aren't all that smart. Okay, work with me. You're going to say something. He says, people in wheelchairs have 25% less disposable income. I'm like, okay. And you're trying to sell me a $50,000 to $70,000 vehicle. Now, because he's a veteran, the VA would help him. He goes, why don't you just buy a whole bunch of used vans and convert them and drop the price 15 grand? Mm-hmm. So I'm like, you know what? That is so smart. There's got to be a good reason we're not doing it. Well, today, 70% of vehicles that are converted are used vehicles. We went out to Hertz, Enterprise, and we bought their fleets right about now, right about when all the vacations are over, because they make their fleets heavy in the summer. And we bought these used vehicles that still had warranty on them, and we converted them. And like this gentleman mentioned, we took about 15 grand. I got paid a lot of money to do that, but it wasn't my idea. I just listened. And I promise every manufacturer out there, your customers have these kind of ideas if you know how to ask.
Yes. Yes, yes, yes. Well, we are here towards the end.
All right.
I need to wrap up. And, because I, as I've said before, you and I could talk for a week. You're a font of wisdom and ideas and information and experiences. And I just appreciate that so much about you. And I want to ask you two questions. One, why are you so passionate about manufacturing?
Well,
what do you love about it?
I lived it. So as our company grew, all of a sudden we were giving more in taxes, and it helped the local schools. All of a sudden, people in our office were able to help pay for their kids' college. All of a sudden, our owners started opening up orphanages all over the world, right? When we went from 4 million to 300 million, last I heard, he had 11 orphanages all over the world. He took that money and made a difference.
Oh, I love
Our
that.
country was built based on manufacturing hard work.
Yep.
But the real gift is when we're successful. You're training people with skills that they're going to use the rest of their lives. You're impacting their families. Their kids are going to college. I mean, people say, man, you sound like a preacher. Well, on the weekends, I talk at churches, right? This is my ministry, man. Get your business healthy Get your heads healthy and make a difference.
Give me chills.
Ah,
Well, and to leave our listeners with something
sure.
extra, because they already got a lot out of this episode, I'm hoping. What do you see for 2025? And if somebody's listening to this in 2025, that great. But kind of looking ahead, do you have any advice or a piece of wisdom that you'd like to share for manufacturers to be thinking about or looking at?
Well, you can go along and do what you've always done and hope. But, as you know, hope's not a strategy.
Right.
People are worried about uncertainty. McKinsey did a study on uncertain times. And yep, 75% of manufacturers had a decrease in revenue during uncertain times. But 14% grew on average 9%. So how do you become a 14%er? We talked about that today. Make sure your team has the skills. Make sure you know why people buy and why they don't. Understand their current problems. Maybe you need to come up with some new products. That's great. Or just hope. Batten down the hatches, cut all your costs. Yeah, you can do that.
Mm-hmm.
But do it strategically. What if, when all your competitors are batting down the hatches, you're launching amazing, innovative products that solve problems that everybody has? That's what we did at the plastics company, by the way. In 1 year, we doubled the company from 38 million, and it was around 79.5 million in 12 months. Just because we heard one problem that nobody was hearing. I promise you, every one of you listening, your customers have problems you don't know about. I just spoke at a conference called SAMA, and my whole topic was, have you grown too familiar with your customers? You think you know them really well. Maybe it's dated. So I taught everybody how to tune into what's going on today. So yeah, I love your podcast. I recommend your podcast to a lot of people in the manufacturing community. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Well, my friend, I appreciate you more than you know, and look forward to having you back for sure. And I just want to say thank you for the work that you do in this world. I feel like you are truly making a difference. And I do love, love, love your approach. No smoke and mirrors. What you see is what you get, and it's road tested. So
yeah,
thank you.
Over 40
much.
Years, it's road tested. And again, if you don't want to hire me, read the book and follow the instructions. And I wrote the book that way, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, thank you for having me today.
Well, you're most welcome. And for everyone listening or watching this, we want you to know how important you are and that the work you do truly matters. As Mark mentioned earlier, we are not just supporting ourselves, we're supporting our team and their families and our community and our nation. Like it's really like the ripple effect. So if nobody tells you this week, you are important and you matter. So keep manufacturing out loud, as I used to say in the old podcast, because we truly need you. We'll see you next time.
Nice meeting everybody.
If you're not already, subscribe to the Manufacturing Masters podcast on Apple Music or Spotify. And for a deeper dive, head on over to manufacturing-masters.com. It's everything they never taught you in school.